right, we heard them. Death, 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 dying, more death. You go backwards. Okay? So we're really talking about death. Did you hear it? Yeah. So when confronted with that kind of reflection in our scriptural tradition, we really ought to spend some time today now reflecting on death. Yay! Okay, so as church today going, we talk about death. That's correct. So let's put it into context again, because this is always something I find helpful, is to look back into history to figure out what was kind of in the atmosphere of ideas and culture and society that was informing this call to reflection on death, and how that got picked up through time in the Christian tradition, and why it is that even in our American heritage, we have even art that asks us to reflect on death. So, going back to about 400 years before Christ, in the area of the ancient Mediterranean, in the area that was the Persian Empire, there was a tradition in storytelling that would begin like this. There once was a king. Now, we say once upon a time, and we know that a really good story is about the time that we should listen to. But then it was, there once was a king. Because the idea in the culture was that kings were people of enormous influence, but they were also understood as people who had wisdom and carried wisdom. So very early on in the ancient Mediterranean, in the area in which later on Christ and his followers emerged, in that area there was already arising a tradition that we know as the wisdom tradition. And we have wisdom tradition that involves both certain books of the Old Testament and certain books of the Apocrypha and certain books of the New Testament and certain songs that we recognize and lift up in kind of a little bit of a different light and say this is part of that ancient wisdom tradition. The book of Ecclesiasticus is one of those. It is part of what we would recognize as part of our Christian legacy in wisdom tradition. Ecclesiastes that we've read from in our Old Testament reading is something that emerged during that time, in that period, probably sometime between 450 and 250 BC, when these ideas are really percolating, the wisdom tradition is emerging. And part of that wisdom tradition is to recognize that life seems to not really matter how we live it, we're all going to die. Part of a reflection tradition on what does it mean to be living a mortal life. In particular, in the Greek tradition that emerges around the same time, about the year 350 BC, a guy named Epicurus comes along, and he is informed by this emerging wisdom tradition in the area he's exposed to, and where he is, he begins to reflect on these same ideas. Because the wisdom tradition has three things that inform it. The first thing it does is it's based on observation. So you look at the world around you. The second thing you do is you reflect on what you're seeing. And the third thing is it makes some conclusions about how you're going to live your life because of what you just saw. So, and choices that you're going to make. Epicurus said, I'm looking at all these things around me. I'm realizing mortal life is mortal life, and how ought we to live our life in that vein, because we are mortal. And he says, well, a lot of life is about suffering. So we want to live our life in such a way that really either accepts our suffering in a way that's calm and doesn't contribute to other people's suffering. And also in the worldview, the deities existed for the Epicureans, but they were not engaged in human life. They lived in their own sphere, and they really didn't care at all about the human sphere. They do what they do, we do what we do. We're mortal, they're not, they're immortal. And in a mortal life, we should enjoy our food and drink. We should enjoy fellowships as the Epicureans. But we shouldn't overindulge, because overindulgence starts to create suffering. So in that vein comes along more Greek philosophy. He kind of builds on Plato and goes forward. Another philosophy arose for the Stoics. And the Stoics kind of had that similar idea: we must reflect on our mortality. But they were not as keen on engaging in the passions of life, because they felt that self-control was very important. And in fact, Stoicism was the leading philosophy of life and belief system in ancient Rome, all during the period of the Christian tradition emerging, until Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. So people in the army are pretty much majorly Stoics. So they're reserved, they're controlling their passions, they're trying to be calm in the face of pain and suffering, and they just simply accept mortality as something that's part of the human condition. And I think they need to do that because soldiers are causing a whole lot of mortality when they're out there in the battling for Rome. So in that kind of cultural milieu, one of the things I remember when I first began studying Greek philosophy at a younger age, I remember coming across something that said, basically, Greek philosophy is nothing more than about dying and death. What you do when you're dying and what it's going to be like to be dead. In fact, the Epicureans would have carved on their tombstones the phrase belonging to their school of study, which was, I was not, I was, I am not, I don't care. I was not, I was, I am not, I don't care. In fact, today, many humanists have that same inscription carved on their tombstones. This, then, is the cultural atmosphere where Jesus is teaching. He's informed by Greco-Roman belief systems. The Romans emulated and admired the Greek philosophers. They are Stoics. They're informed by this as well. And this idea of vanity of vanities, all is vanity, is very much Epicurean. And Ecclesiastes is influenced by that. All is vanity. No matter what we do, we lose it. And other people get to reap what we sowed. And I'm so depressed and disappointed. Right? Doesn't it remind you of that old children's rhymes? I'm going to go eat some worms. Kind of just like that. Doesn't it? And instead of staying in that place, of basically saying that the mortal sphere is disconnected from the divine sphere, we have to live within the stuckness of mortality, comes along Jesus. And I'll remember, in Judaism, the Hebrews also did not have an afterlife. They had a place where you kind of could get stuck a little bit in Sheol, but it wasn't a very pleasant place. It was a place you would hang out. And after that, then you didn't exist at all. And Jesus comes into this set of worldviews and he says, I have news for you. Our God, instead of saying, I was not, I was, I am not, I don't care. The good news is God very much is involved in the human sphere and the sphere of creation, such that God says, I always was, I am, I always will be, and I care very, very much for all that I have made. And when he comes into the human sphere with this message, people who are Stoics and Epicureans are really kind of stunned. Like, explain this to me again. Why could anything I do as a human being in my life have any effect on God? God has all the juju. What can I possibly do that would in fact impact God in any kind of way that God would care about? What power could I possibly have? And Jesus demonstrates that power in every aspect of his life. He becomes the teaching of why it matters about how we live our lives. It becomes about how he lives his life to heal those who are sick. It becomes about how he brings greater justice to the human communities he encounters by challenging oppressive structures in society and religion that keep people oppressed and alienated. Especially he challenges any belief system or philosophy that alienates people from God, that keeps people from feeling that they aren't valuable, that their life isn't worthwhile, that what they do doesn't have meaning. Because in the eyes of God, who is our Creator, we have been made so that we can have life and have it in abundance. We have been made so that as Christians who've chosen to follow this particular man, Jesus our Lord, to see even in his death a very important meaning. That legacy that he gives to us is one that we are to hold, to keep doing energies and missions and tasks and ministries that contribute to healing, that contribute to social justice, that contribute to a greater sense of wisdom in the world that is accessible to all people, that all people have the opportunity to learn and to do more and make more of their life, and that all people are beloved. Because when we hear in this Luke story in the gospel, when Jesus says in this kind of parable he tells, he constructs this setting of a wealthy man who says, I have so much, I have to make room for more. I have so much, I have to make room for more. First of all, who gave him all of that? He seems to attribute it all to his own power, because he's separated from a sense of God's agency in his life and in the world. He did it. It's all I statements in that. I made, I grew, I have, I can take down, I can build up. Not so much. Even his talents about how to build barns or oversee their building have been given to him by God. And in all the plans he's making, it's always all about him. And all the extra he has, he intends to keep and give nothing away. In this way, when Jesus says we can't focus on what makes us wealthy, but rather how we enrich God. And that's the impact we can have. How could we possibly enrich God? It's by the one currency that Jesus says again and again and again and exemplifies constantly. It is a currency called love. But boy, do we undervalue that. It doesn't seem very kind of attractive just to say, let's go out and love each other. In fact, sometimes that seems like, well, duh, we hear that all the time. But when we love, when we are informed by that love for God, when we are informed and allow God to be an influence in our life, to be in relationship with a God who says, I always was, and I am, and I always will be, and I care. When we believe in that, then we're a part of a legacy that truly can never be lost. And I think that's the fear of mortality at the ultimate. A fear of being lost. Lost to memory, lost to history, lost. But once God says to us, not only have I made you, I have found you. And I have founded a kingdom on you that is yours to make. And when you operate from that currency of love, where you give of what you have, because of what you have, I gave to you. And when you understand that you're kind of a bank that's always made to be making loans, that we're made to just continue to allow the ATM of God's love to be always known and accessible and abundant and cut off from no one. Whatever their creed, whatever their faith, whatever their orientation of love, whatever their race, whatever their sense of identity, God has made them. God has put them into creation as something God has called good. The God who always was, who is, who always will be, will never allow that wealth to be lost. We don't know what that will be like when we are done with this mortal life. What we do know is that we have an infinite power in it to either create beauty and love and justice and wisdom, or destroy the world that God has given us. It matters that yesterday 20 people were gunned down yet again in Texas. It matters. It matters what we do and how we respond, whether we respond through prayer, whether we respond with a civic voice that demands change, whether we want our laws to reflect the kind of justice and community that we want to build and feel called to live in. It matters whether we do something or whether we do nothing. In all of this, whatever we do, we are assured of God's love. But do we believe in that love? Or is it just another one of those once upon a time stories? There was a man named Jesus, and he died. The God who always was, who is, and always will be, says to us, and he lived. We are to live our lives as St. Paul reminds us in the reading we heard from him today, that Christ is in us, and we are in Christ, and the infinite power we have to love will make God's kingdom real inside us. It always was, and it is, and it always will be, forever and ever.